When you think of the action film genre, what is the first movie that comes to mind? Throughout film history, different filmmakers and stars within the space have combined to create wholly unique and realized cinematic experiences, with nothing else on their mind outside of audience entertainment. We see this exemplified through so much of film history, yet there are so many specific juggernauts within the space that truly showcase what the genre is all about. And perhaps there's no clearer example of this than the Mission Impossible franchise, which stars Tom Cruise. Ever since the first entry into the series back in 1996, Cruise and his collaborative team sought to adapt the long-running television show into a wholly new format, which paved the way for a series that has continued to change and evolve with each new entry. And now, finally, this franchise is coming to an end this year with Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, which is the 8th and final installment in the long-running franchise, which sees Tom Cruise's Ethan Hunt returning to the big screen in a major way. Because of this, I felt it would be fun to watch every single entry in the series before the new one releases, to catch myself up on and immerse myself into the insane and often over-the-top world of Ethan Hunt and his international missions, which is why over the course of the last week, I sat down and completed a marathon of all 7 Mission Impossible films, and I'm going to rank them. Now, this is going to be an extremely tough call, as I don't think there's truly a bad Mission Impossible film out there. Of course, some are better than others, but by and large, it's extremely tough to assign a numerical rating to a series that just gets it right with each entry. Each entry has specific nuances and qualities that it pulls off extremely well, and it's going to be extremely fun examining each film in this franchise and why they specifically work on a craft and cinematic level. And that's also why I'd be curious to hear what your ranking the Mission Impossible franchise is, so definitely leave your thoughts in the comments below. And before the video starts, please feel free to like the video and subscribe if you like the content you see. It sure helps me in the long run, and I deeply appreciate all the support I receive, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Talking about movies is something I love to do, and the fact that I've been able to connect with so many like-minded lovers of cinema while doing it is something I still cannot fathom or comprehend. And I thank you all so much for joining me on this journey, and I look forward to creating future content for you all. With that said, let's get right into my ranking of the Mission Impossible franchise. We start off this ranking at number 7 with Mission Impossible 2, which was released in 2000 and is directed by John Woo. This one is kind of the odd one out within the franchise. Although all of the Mission Impossible films are distinctly different in their own right, they all sort of follow a stylistic pattern that remains close enough to bridge the disparity between their thematic and structural differences. However, here, that is not the case. I can't even begin to describe how jarring it was jumping from De Palma's first film, which showcased steady and nuanced direction in every turn, to John Woo's flashy action romp that feels almost like a different movie entirely than a Mission Impossible film. I mean, right from the get-go, we're thrown into an early 2000s music video aesthetic that features incredibly baffling transitions, rock music renditions of action themes, and blatant use of slow motion throughout. And it doesn't just stop there. This time around, we're yet again introduced to Ethan Hunt, who's somewhere in the Australian outback climbing rock towers for some reason. And in classic Mission Impossible fashion, Hunt is called back to the field in one of the strangest cameos of all time by Anthony Hopkins, who sends him after a deadly virus that has fallen into the wrong hands with one of the worst lines perhaps ever put to film.
Oh, this is not mission difficult, Mr. Hunt. It's mission impossible.
And Hunt's not alone this time around either. You see, the mustache-twirling villain here with a comically large magnifying glass, Sean Ambrose, has the virus under his control and plans to use it to make money for himself, because that's how most of the villains in these types of movies operate for some reason. And in order to infiltrate his inner ranks, Hunt has to recruit Nia Hall, a former thief who is also, wait for it, Ambrose's ex-girlfriend. You know, the strangest thing about this movie is that the subject material and matter here aren't awful. The introduction of the Chimera virus is a really intriguing plot device, and Sean Ambrose himself as the antagonist is deliciously sinister in key parts. And it's never ultimately a boring movie in the slightest, as the plot moves along at a decent clip and never slows down until the end credits roll. It's just so off. Look, I like John Woo and his style when talking about films such as Face Off, where the over-the-top direction and camera movement fits the surreal and oftentimes absurd atmosphere of the film, but when examining a Mission Impossible film where the serious tone and atmosphere is key at conveying so much of the dramatic depth, it just doesn't work. Here, John Woo turns this into more of a Tomb Raider type of action film rather than a Mission Impossible film. The slow motion is just appalling at key points. And while I find myself liking Nia as a character and how Thandie Newton portrays her throughout the film, I find myself ultimately contemplating how this is my least favorite rendition of Ethan Hunt in any of the Mission Impossible films. He just feels completely off and different from other films in the franchise, which I guess fits in with the tone the film tries to achieve, but ultimately rings hollow at the end of the day. And don't even get me started on that third act. I legitimately forgot I was watching an action movie and thought someone had turned on a cheesy MTV music video in certain portions. Overall, while Mission Impossible 2 is definitely a passable film, and it's far from being absolutely terrible. It just pales so poorly in comparison to so many of the other films in the franchise, which execute the material far better. I will give credit where credit is due that this is by far the most individual film in the series in terms of style, yet whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is entirely up to viewer interpretation. Arriving next on the ranking at number 6 is Mission Impossible 3, which was released in 2006 and directed by J.J. Abrams. While my main problem and complaint with the last entry, Mission Impossible 2, was how different and therefore lackluster it felt, one of my main points of praise for this third entry is how different this film is from a tone and atmospheric standpoint in general, but in a way that still feels wholeheartedly in line and committed to the franchise and its core values. I mean, right off the bat, audiences are thrust into an intense opening sequence, in which Ethan Hunt is being interrogated by Philip Seymour Hoffman's Owen Davian, who has kidnapped Hunt's wife and threatens to kill her unless Hunt reveals information, counting down slowly as Hunt begs for his wife's life. This scene is such a jarring difference from anything the franchise has explored thus far, and as a result, the film plays up the intensity in such a visceral and affecting way. This is by far the most cutthroat and intense entry into the franchise overall. While all of the films are exciting and enthralling in their own unique way, the thing that makes Mission Impossible 3 stand apart in this regard is how it fills audiences with a sense of dread in every moment, as Hunt works to attain his goal with the thought of what he stands to lose becoming almost overbearing in the process. In this entry, Hunt is all but retired from his role at the IMF and is now happily married, yet is called back into the field once again when a dangerous biohazard weapon called the Rabbit's Foot is disclosed to be in the possession of notorious arms dealer Owen Davian. After Hunt tries to take Davian back into IMF custody, he is broken free and kidnaps Hunt's wife, threatening her life unless Hunt can return the Rabbit's Foot back to him in time. Working against the clock as his own IMF agents search for him in the process, Hunt assembles a team to stage a heist of a world-destroying weapon unlike any other. I mean, the style of this film alone is enough to raise it to the position it has on my list by itself. The difference in color saturation highlights the intensity of each moment, and the reliance on shaky camera style cinematography highlights the delirious and oftentimes surreal point of view that Ethan experiences as he searches for his wife and the object he needs to track down to save her. And this film definitely has one of the strongest antagonists of the franchise by far in Philip Seymour Hoffman's Owen Davian, who is played in an astounding performance with a calm and sinister underlying that underlies stagnant and passionate emotion in each moment. Yet this incredible portrayal has less to do with the characterization or writing of such a figure and more to do with Philip Seymour Hoffman's incredible capability as an actor, which really does just make you miss him more and more. And in that regard, perhaps that's one of the elements that truly holds this film back. The writing is quite subpar, with moments of showy plot exposition that feel overindulgent and Marvel-level banter between characters that feels out of place amid the grounded and serious tone the film conveys. Action is well choreographed, and Michael Giacchino's score here is quite excellent as well. Yet in classic J.J. Abrams fashion, and Star Wars fans know what I'm talking about, there's a lot of cool stuff on display here that's hampered by less than stellar writing and a few plot reveals and twists towards the middle of the third act that feel underdeveloped and almost shoehorned in, to put it lightly. It's definitely an interesting film in how it attempts something different to immense effect, and it's a solid film in managing to capture a specific action-oriented atmosphere, but part of the appeal that I find myself loving about the Mission Impossible films is how fun and charming they are in addition to being serious and grounded. And this film is way too dark to capture that same tone, which is why it ranks considerably lower for me. It's a fun film, but lackluster in key areas throughout. At the number 5 spot, we have Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, which was released in 2015 and directed by Christopher McQuarrie. Now, this is the first Mission Impossible film that was directed by McQuarrie, and it wouldn't be the last, as McQuarrie and Cruise went on to collaborate on pretty much every single other film in the franchise after this entry. And while this seems like a match made in heaven for the action-based aspect of this franchise, and McQuarrie's other entries into the series rank higher on my list, I can't help but find that this is by far the weakest of McQuarrie's efforts, regardless of how fine it is overall as a film. This entry follows Hunt as he finds himself facing an all-new set of problems. The IMF is disbanded by the United States government, and so Hunt finds himself working off the grid, without the help of his organization backing him, as the CIA is actively looking to either capture or kill him and his associates. This is further complicated by the rise of a criminal network called the Syndicate, which threatens Hunt's life and the lives of those closest to him unless he hands over valuable data that could threaten the safety of the entire world. Now, if that plot synopsis sounds convoluted, don't shoot the messenger, as one of the weakest points of this series entry overall is how confusing and convoluted the plot itself remains for large portions of the runtime. It turns out that all the over-the-top action sequences in the world cannot save a film entirely, as although this entry has by far a lot of trademark action set pieces that introduce McQuarrie's elaborate style into this franchise, it almost seems to get distracted along the way, sacrificing actual intrigue and enthrallment for the sake of showy exposition that attempts to set up a complex antagonistic force, but never establishes the bare minimum to keep audiences intrigued or invested into the story overall. The film definitely has its moments throughout and then some. Breathless scenes of action choreography fill so much of the film's runtime. I mean, are you going to see me complain about a cold open where Tom Cruise is legitimately strapped to the side of an airplane as it takes off at top speed? Absolutely not. And there are so many memorable sequences here directed in such an intense and electrifying way through McQuarrie's vision. I mean, hello, that opera scene? Genuinely a top 5 moment of the franchise for sure, by far. It's not even close. Alas, however, for everything this film ultimately achieves on such a high level, the real truth of Rogue Nation as an overall film is that the sum is less than its parts. In this regard, Rogue Nation is made up of memorable scenes scattered throughout a 2 hour and 11-minute mess that leaves audiences with the task of sorting through all of it to make sense of everything the film tries to accomplish. I will say, however, that the film does introduce one of my favorite characters in the entire franchise in this one, which is Ilsa Faust, portrayed expertly by Rebecca Ferguson. Her cat and mouse game with Hunt the entire film is one of the highlights of this movie by far. And the tension and unease that arises from their on-screen chemistry and bond tests loyalties not only to the closest associates, but to each other. And while the central antagonist of the film is well-intentioned and is played very well by screen legend Sean Harris, I ultimately found myself unengaged with how over-the-top some of his actions and nuances were throughout the film. I mean, this guy just screams stock Bond villain, which, in a franchise that prides itself on originality within the action genre, seems pretty out of place in an otherwise grounded and nuanced film. And while the plot indeed moves at a breakneck pace with a lot of grounded action and intrigue to win audiences over, third act arrives in such a convoluted and messy way, with a half-baked conclusion that feels quite derivative from other spy thrillers of old. And while it's clear that McQuarrie directs this one with such a solid flourish and eye for on-screen action choreography, I can't help but compare this one to the other entries in the series that execute the overall package and choreography of the specific scenes in question far better than this one does. And don't worry, we'll get to his other entries in time. Overall, Rogue Nation is far from a bad movie in the slightest, and I quite enjoy rewatches of this one from time to time. However, it's also the Mission Impossible film that feels the most taxing on audiences, as it requires a lot to get enthralled into the mission from the start and leaves the audience in the dark in a few key spots, making this mission of Hunt's feel somewhat broken and convoluted as a result. At the number 4 spot, we have arguably the most impactful film in the entire franchise. I mean, without this one, there would not be the Mission Impossible series as we know it today. And that all stems from the 1996 spy thriller that rocked the generation, Mission Impossible, which is directed by legendary filmmaker Brian De Palma. I mean, what to even say about this entry that hasn't already been said before? While it does lean into many of the tropes and genre pitfalls that befall so many entries into the action genre during this time period, the most astounding thing about Mission Impossible, and the factor that makes it rank so high on my personal list, is how it manages to feel fresh and original regardless of how formulaic and derivative I might feel in portions. There's a certain style and flair to this one that just feels complete, due in part to De Palma's incredible direction and choreography behind the scenes. I mean, look no further than the sequence in which Hunt's team infiltrates the gala towards the beginning of the film. After assuming the identity of a partygoer at the event, we as an audience are placed inside the first-person point of view of Hunt as he moves throughout the event, highlighting the reactions of event attendees as they interact with the audience themselves. This in turn immerses audiences into the thick of the action, as if we are partaking in the mission alongside these characters, which is an element that is noticeably absent from other entries in the series overall. This first entry introduces the character of Ethan Hunt, skilled IMF agent who is sent with his team to Prague under the direction of Jim Phillips to stop a rogue agent from stealing a CIA knock list. While partaking in the mission, things go wrong, leaving Jim and all of Ethan's team dead. All except for Ethan. Alone and with no guidance for a mission gone horribly wrong, Ethan stumbles to IMF director Eugene Kittredge, who believes Hunt to be a mole within the IMF who killed his team in the accident. Determined to prove he is not the mole, Hunt embarks on a mission that seems drastically, well, impossible to say the least, to grab the real knock list and prove who the mole is before time runs out. Perhaps one of the elements that works to make Mission Impossible work is how timeless and recognizable it feels overall. I mean, audiences everywhere are at least familiar, however vaguely, with the sequence where Hunt breaks into the CIA vault from above, suspended in air from cables as he breaks into a government supercomputer. And to the film's credit, this entry truly has a mission that feels almost impossible in every sense of the word. As Hunt breaks down the goal of their mission to the small team assembled for the task, including computer hacker Luther Stickle and pilot Franz Krieger, everything about this far-fetched plan seems borderline ridiculous. This leaves audience members hooked from the start, as if wanting to know how these talented and skilled agents plan to execute something as innately insane as this. This makes for moments throughout where the tension is felt on such a palpable level thanks to De Palma's incredible direction. And it's honestly so nice to see a Mission Impossible film that feels almost simple in a sense of the word, when compared to how over the top the second and third entries, and to an extent the entries after this point, feel. Many film fans and fans of the franchise will rank the first entry to the series on the lower end of their lists, as many feel it's a film that feels too derivative for its own good, as if later entries to the series execute the same premise in a far better regard. And while it's definitely true that later films in the series take the same concept or idea for a scene and build upon it in an exponential way, it remains to be seen that the charm and charisma that abounds so much of this film cannot be ignored in the slightest and remains timeless in comparison. It's just such a fun time from start to finish. It has nothing more on its mind than centralized mission, and in a franchise that begins to get more and more narratively complex as the films progress, is a welcome surprise this time around. Like many action action films, this one is far from perfect. Plot conveniences abound at key points throughout, and it's definitely rough around the edges in terms of execution overall. And this is far from the most visually stunning work inside of this franchise. Yet ultimately, its flaws and imperfections make me appreciate it and like it even more as an earnest work of action filmmaking that paved the way for countless film and television properties that we know and love today within the genre. It's an effortless and enthralling 90s action film starring Cruise at his heyday, and an effortlessly charismatic and charming role and leading performance with memorable action set pieces and intense plot reveals to boot. What more could you ask for? At the number 3 spot, we have the most recent Mission Impossible entry that was released in 2023 and was directed yet again by Christopher McQuarrie, which is Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning. First in a planned 2-part film saga, the second of which is releasing in a few days' time with Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. This film seeks to tell the most elaborate and complex story of Ethan Hunt's career yet, as he is thrust yet again into a dangerous mission that threatens not only his life but the lives of those closest to him, as the rise of an advanced AI intelligence life form called the Entity threatens the safety of the world as dangerous people plan to take control of the AI through a cruciform key to wield its power over the world itself. If that sounds like a lot of plot to fit into a movie, trust me, it is. And that's why I cannot wait to see how this saga concludes in the final installment of the series, as this film does indeed end on a cliffhanger. However, unlike many other films where such a cliffhanger ending would feel jarring and incomplete, here it feels natural and nuanced, as if to say, we have more in store, but you have to be patient. And I don't know about most audience members, but I found myself eagerly awaiting whatever happens next. Speaking of most audience members, you might be shocked to find that many people who are fans of the franchise do not like this movie at all. And I can already picture a crowded and angry group of fans typing away in my comment sections, "Oh my gosh, you ranked Dead Reckoning 3rd? What do you mean 3rd? Yet, I'm ultimately going to stand by it, because I personally believe this is not only one of the strongest entries into the franchise by far, but exactly the type of big budget action filmmaking we need to see more of in our current film industry today. Everything about this film operates on an entirely different level from its competition, whether due in part to characterization, plot nuance, or straight up enthralling action choreography. What makes Dead Reckoning so prevalent and immense is how captivating and stunning it is in large portions throughout. This is bombastic and grandiose filmmaking, and this is especially due in part to the antagonistic force of the film, which is the sentient AI life form, the Entity. Instead of feeling like a plot gimmick that many films would have executed such a premise as, the Entity is conveyed in such a prevalent and unforgettable way, with sinister underlines that paint such a visceral reaction for audience members in key moments throughout. The fact that Ethan and his crew are up against not just a person, but a highly programmed and capable life form, with the ability to compute any outcome or possibility ahead of what action Ethan takes, is absolutely incredible, and is conveyed further in Asai Morales' antagonistic character Gabriel, who is a close friend with the Entity and seems to communicate with the life form, which provides him with information seemingly on the future that makes for moments of creepy and perilous execution. There's a sinister and underlying sense of dread that fills a lot of this film's runtime, and it's almost unshakable in key points. The stakes feel present and prevalent, and the pacing never lets up, making for a memorable and intense experience unlike any other in the series, that grabs you from the start and never lets go. Add to that incredible characters yet again, including the introduction of Haley Atwell's skilled thief, Grace, who's added to the team this time around, and old favorites such as Luther and Benji, played by Simon Pegg, and you have such a fun supporting cast to move through this environment with ease. Yet also, the reason why Dead Reckoning works so well as a film is because it showcases how Ethan's characterization changes and shifts when the personal lives around him are directly affected by the overarching reach of such an antagonistic force, and how his rash and determined decision-making factors and changes into so much dramatic depth within the film. Ethan feels fully fleshed out here, with so much nuance and depth behind every action conveyed expertly by Tom Cruise. And on top of that, it's just a thrilling ride from start to finish. This film features perhaps one of my favorite third acts from the entire franchise thus far, as the entire train sequence within the third act of the film is truly electrifying and incredibly realized from start to finish, with great blocking and action choreography, combined with impeccable framing and cinematography from McQuarrie yet again. It also breaches almost borderline ridiculous territory with the stunts Cruise pulls within this portion of the film, further accentuating and drawing attention to the fact that this man will literally put his life in harm's way for our entertainment, which you just can't help but respect at the end of the day, as Tom Cruise truly is just that guy. And while the film never feels as original or fresh as you might expect, with a portion of the train sequence feeling pulled right out of the second Jurassic Park film, for example, it also showcases so much intensity and emotional depth in each sequence, as we witness character shifts and changes that pack a gut punch and never lessen their impact. It by far feels like one of the most mature entries into this series overall, fleshes out its characters with ease to deliver a solid emotional core that remains intact and functioning for the entire runtime. It also introduces a long-held theory of mine that I contemplated as I compiled my notes for the rest of my series ranking, which is that the amount of the film's runtime that Tom Cruise spends running is directly proportional to how good the Mission Impossible film is. Whether this is actually the case or not is entirely up to interpretation, but I mean, let's be real. The Tom Cruise running scenes here are pretty intense, as is the rest of the film, so it is a distinct possibility, however distinct it might be. Overall, while it might have more than a few shortcomings, it's hard to judge how effective the entry's thematic angle is without having seen the newest and final entry that continues the story. However, the hatred steered directly towards this film is not only confusing but blatantly hurtful as well. When you analyze Dead Reckoning from a craft and thematic level, you unearth something truly special, as it is the rare action film made nowadays that feels made with love and passion behind the camera, while also remaining largely substantial and full of depth for the entirety of its runtime. Overall, I find myself revisiting this entry with more love and appreciation every time I watch it, and I hope audiences give it a shot to unearth just how underrated and underappreciated this one is against the rest of the series entries. And finally, we have arrived at the coveted final 2 spots on the ranked list. So, you might ask, which of the final 2 films ranks as number 2? Well, it's a close call between them, as depending on my mood, my preference between the two can switch by the minute, as these are by far my absolute favorites of the Mission Impossible franchise by far. But if I had to assign a numerical rating to them in order, then 2011's Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, directed by Brad Bird, has to take the number 2 spot. Simply put, I love this movie, full stop. This is one of the finest action films ever made, directed by someone who has a fundamental understanding of the genre itself and the intricacies that go into crafting something so grandiose and visceral on screen. Ghost Protocol is above all the only entry in the Mission Impossible franchise that consistently stresses me out with each viewing, and I think that's why I love it so much. The tension is palpable throughout so much of the runtime itself, which makes for insane moments of peril mixed with an overarching action feel that blends to create a perfect swirl of an action film. Ghost Protocol follows Ethan Hunt as he grapples with the fact that the IMF is now disavowed by the US government after a terrorist attack in Russia is blamed on their activities. This initiates a plan simply titled Ghost Protocol, which essentially means that Ethan and his team are off the grid, with none of the IMF's resources available at their disposal to help them. This tasks Ethan with somehow clearing the name of all involved at the IMF, while also stopping a known mercenary from carrying out his plans for nuclear war, all essentially on his own. The most fascinating element of Ghost Protocol as a film stems directly from its setup. Unlike the other entries in this series, Ethan and his team cannot rely on backup or many tools at their disposal to help them. They are entirely alone and isolated, which makes every single moment of this film 10 times more impactful, prevalent, and suspenseful than before. Amid all of the plot's fascinating intricacies and elements, the movie as a whole is just simply a blast from start to finish. Bird's direction is among the best of the entire franchise in a way that not only engages the audience throughout, but also remains visually interesting as well. I mean, it makes sense since Bird comes from a background based in action-oriented filmmaking, but it's also just impressive to see a film rely on placement of key ideas and themes throughout to immerse audiences into that said atmosphere. And this entry has by far some of those memorable, stress-inducing, and overall jaw-dropping sequences among any film in the Mission Impossible franchise by far. I mean, the sequence where Ethan scales the Burj Khalifa in Dubai in order to reach a closed-off access point, all while his gear slowly fails, and the entire thing is shot with IMAX cameras. Insane, masterful, give me 15 more of these right now. Amid all that, I also find myself really enjoying the charisma and connection this team has within this entry, as Jeremy Renner's William Brandt is a fun and mysterious addition to the team with plenty of time to shine, and I also love how the film uses Simon Pegg's Benji Dunn to great effect, as he's given a central role this time around and has plenty of opportunity to prove himself resourceful and key within the film's events. And, playing off of my former theory about the amount of screen time Tom Cruise spends running correlating to how good the film is, this film includes quintessentially the best Tom Cruise running sequence within the entire franchise, which is an extended 10 minutes where Hunt chases a subject through a desert sandstorm, where audiences are immersed fully into their surrounding with expert sound design and POV placement. And the final act in particular, which involves tight editing and tension to immerse audiences into the thick of the action, as Hunt battles the antagonist inside of an advanced car park, is also so well accomplished and directed by far. Overall, one of the finest things I can say about Ghost Protocol, and the reason it ranks so high on my personal list, is how smooth it is from not just a filmmaking standpoint, but an entertainment standpoint as well. The film's plot moves along at a tight clip, and the inclusion of so many intense elements here that are noticeably absent from future series entries makes for an unforgettable experience unlike any other. Ultimately, the script has some issues, and the reason after careful contemplation that I rank it slightly lower than the number 1 spot is because of the noticeable absence of Luther Stickle this time around, who was delegated to essentially a glorified cameo towards the end of the film. Yet this doesn't ultimately distract from how tight and controlled this one is, and remains such a memorable entry and juggernaut within the action sphere overall. This one is just a blast to watch and rewatch, and I find myself falling in love with it more and more on subsequent rewatches. And last but not least, the coveted number 1 spot on my list, and by far my favorite of the Mission Impossible films by far, is, you might have guessed it, 2018's Mission Impossible Fallout, which is once again directed by Christopher McQuarrie. And oh my gosh, what a film this is. This is arguably the best Mission Impossible film ever made, and I mean every single word of that. And I'm sure that this will honestly be the general consensus across all fans of this franchise. Although I'd love to hear differing opinions in the comments below as to whether this film takes the gold in your opinion or not. It's just a flawless and effortless film on so many levels. This is McQuarrie and Cruise teaming up to deliver a cinematic experience unlike any other. Every single second, and I literally mean second of this film, right from the opening, is packed to the brim with some of the best action I've ever seen put to the silver screen, and I mean every word of that. Hunt is back and better than ever in this entry, which opens with Hunt making a difficult choice between saving those closest to him or saving a case of plutonium cores that is intended for world-altering destruction. Although he chooses what his heart believes is important, the US government sees his choice as foolish and sends Hunt, along with a newcomer agent, to track down the plutonium cores before they fall into the wrong hands with devastating consequences. And while this is the central plot synopsis that best describes the film overall, the best thing about Fallout, and the reason it works as my favorite entry into the Mission Impossible series, is because it is so much more than just that. This is such a complex film on so many levels, further exploring the emotional arc that Ethan faces as his personal life interferes with his missions, and the fallout, no pun intended, of his actions towards saving a specific group of people he loves over the greater good. And this raises such a fascinating exploration to the merits of selfless sacrifice and personal distinction within your work, which is conveyed and explored in such a staggering and jaw-dropping way. The emotional angle this film imparts at key moments is the stuff of sheer magic, and it is such a well-rounded and accomplished film on so many fronts. I won't sugarcoat it or over-explain it in any regard. This is a film you simply have to see to believe. Although I feel that much of the enjoyment from the film lies in having further context behind the film in relation to key ideas and themes throughout, I also find it's just a film you can jump in and enjoy based on how much fun it really is. And oh, it's a fun one in every sense of the word. This is high-stakes intensity of the highest order, with every second of the film devoted to pure audience immersion and enjoyment. I've never experienced a shot of adrenaline personally myself, but I'd imagine it feels a lot like watching Mission Impossible Fallout. Everywhere you look, you'll probably see other film fans proclaiming praises for Fallout and its incredible accomplishments, so I won't belabor my argument towards this point. All I'll say is, this movie gets it. That's it. That's the review. And that's my ranking of the Mission Impossible franchise. As mentioned, it almost feels impossible in some aspects to organize these in any relevant fashion. But I hope you've enjoyed not only my ranking of the films, but my analysis on their key ideas and themes of what they managed to achieve in their own regards. If you like this video and want to see more of my film reviews and analysis covering a wide range of releases, don't forget to click that subscribe button down below, like the video, and turn on push notifications to be notified whenever I upload a new video to my channel. Also, feel free to leave your own personal ranking of the Mission Impossible films in the comments below, as I'd love to see your takes on this incredible franchise. With that being said, until next time, this is Mitchell signing off. Peace out.